everybody. Welcome you back to ICT project course module week 5 lesson 1. I'm Tushar Silva from University of Moratuwa, bringing you functional and non-functional requirement lesson of ITE 1942 ICT project course module. Let's see what are the lesson outcomes are. On successful completion of this lesson, you will be able to define system requirements. What can be classified as system requirements? And also, you will be able to see what user requirements are. What other things will be classified as user requirements? And also, you do need to identify another classification of system requirements, that is, functional and non-functional requirements. So what requirements will be falling as functional requirements and what other functional requirements will not be considered there, and we call them non-functional requirements. You will be able to compare functional and non-functional requirements and identify them separately. Once you have identified these functional and non-functional requirements, you will be able to map them to your own problem and identify your problem-specific functional requirements and non-functional requirements. Let's quickly wrap up things from our previous lectures. We learned about what is a programmable problem. You identified the problem that can be solvable using a computer program. So now we are planning to develop such a problem solution. Then we talked about the scope of a project and what factors would be used to determine the project scope. We analyzed them one by one. And you identified the scope of your project. Now you are very good at determining scope of your ICT project. And then we talked about a proposed project proposal. So that is a statement that you put your project idea into a piece of writing. And there you don't need to specify your aims and objectives, and those aims should be aligned with what your system wants to do. And in there, you do need to know in what order you have to put all your aims, objectives, and the background motivation, and the proposed solutions, and the other system-related content. So those will be saved as a project proposal. Once you prepare a project proposal, you learn that there is a model that you can include in your proposal section chapter. So that is called input, process, output. So there basically you need to model what sort of input your system wants to read in and what do they do. What does the system do to those inputs? That created the set of processes and what the system generate as a final output. So that created the output of your model. So once you have identified the system input and the processes and output, so now it is easy for you to analyze the requirements. So let's see what those requirements are and how to identify those requirements in relating to your project. First, we learn about system requirements. The system requirements, we call it software system requirements, are descriptions of features and functionalities of the target system. Target systems represent the system that you are going to build. So when you know what are you going to do and what does your system do, it's easy for you to determine what are the components or the functionalities in your system. So these requirements or system requirements convey the expectation of users from the software system. So system will tell you this is what users wants me to do. The requirements can be obvious. Some are very straightforward, but some are hidden. Some are not easy to describe, known or unknown. expected or unexpected from client's point of view. But as a system designer, we do know each and every aspects of our system, functional aspects. But from the client or the end user's point of view, these systems are quite hidden. We are not going to write them as a list and tell the end user, these are the system requirements you will be getting to know throughout this system. And they need to be described completely. We cannot define them halfway and start a design and implementation of our system. So that's impossible because we do need to go back there and revise our requirements or identify new requirements and develop the model according to client's need. Make sure that the final product will be fulfilled all client's requirements and the customer will be very happy to have it. So that is what you need to target at. So better identification of these requirements is really essential for you to develop a complete system. Now think about our example we have learned in many lessons. So what is that? That's system student management system. Student management system basically focus on two major aspects: registering students and tracking their payments. Students are registered for courses. So there are certain list of courses offered by one particular institute, and then students will be registered for those courses, and courses will be having several lectures, and lecturers are teaching on those courses. The students have to pay for those classes, or maybe the examination fees are to be paid. So all these tasks need to be managed. So you have to add, delete, insert. So those basic functionalities are to be maintained and additional ones are to be provided. So that's the kind of complex system. We identified the scope of that system in earlier lectures. Now, we do need to focus on major processes. So if you know the processes, then it's easy for you to analyze those processes and identify requirements. Here we first need to identify the system-related requirements. So we call them functional requirements. So functional requirements are related to what the user wants to do with the system. So for an example, in our student management system, the student needs to register for a particular course, or maybe multiple subjects will be conducted under that particular course. So when their registration is taken place, students need to assign a unique ID registration number and input all the input details regarding students. Let's say that their name, address, gender, and the date of birth, and also some other ID card numbers, other related information. So everything needs to be stored nicely. And it's pretty important that all the information that you are reading into your system should be correct. And also in the courses section, so what courses have they been registered for? Are they registering for all courses? What about the fees? And what about the payment mechanisms? Are they going to make one-time payment or installments will be requested? So need to check the eligibility of the students, so whether they can register for a particular course, if it is an examination or degree program, so they need to fulfill basic A-level requirements. So all these requirements handling are to be maintained there. So that's a different thing that you need to focus on when you try to register student via a system. So you need to make sure that your system is error-free. So you should not let anyone to insert a wrong ID or maybe wrong email address. Or maybe if the email address is not in the correct format, it should not be accepted by your system. So those are very crucial. And another aspect that we need to look at is the payment record. So whether the student have made all the payments on time, are there any pending payments? And what about the student has paid in full amount? Are we going to give a discount? So to entertain students and encourage full payment of student at once. So then what system requirements we identified here? They are related to the registration of students for courses and maintaining their personal details as well as course registration details, and keep track of their payments. So those are the major sections, major processes that we need to dig into and identify sub processes or the functionalities that we need to call them system requirements. So we can classify these system requirements either as functional requirements or non-functional requirements. Functional requirements which are totally related to the functional aspects of a software. So functional aspects, in simple case, we can say what system wants us to have, or what does it do. These functions or the functionalities may be within the software or we can receive it from the software. So both aspects. It has something inside it to deliver something out. And on the other hand, non-functional requirements, they are not totally related to these functional aspects of the software requirement. So they will be implicit. So security, the satisfiability, or whether user satisfaction is fulfilled or the security is perfect, is it extensible or is it reliable? So those are the characteristics of the software, how user-friendly it is. So some are implicit or expected characteristics of the software, which users make assumption of. So when you give your system to an end user must be very happy and very comfortable with the system. So he must know, we know that we are going to develop systems for a new user who has no such experience in programming skills. So the user do not have any programming skills to understand what is going on inside it. He just look at the front end. The front end should be very attractive and should be really related to the problem. So it should not collect all of the unnecessary information, focus on what user wants to have in the system. So we keep all these things in our mind, and we do need to provide a system that use always requested, nothing less. Functional requirements, we can simply say that's the functional aspect of the software. In one sentence, what does the system do? What my clients wants from the system? So we define functions, what does it do to give what user wants, and also the functionality. So maybe several functions needs to be merged together to provide one single task. I told you that when user is successfully registered, we do have to provide a unique ID for the registration number, provided that all informations have been successfully inserted and the payments have been made, and then only he will become a registered student. Requirements are varied from system to system, so there are no rule of thumb. Every system should have these sort of functional requirements. We cannot have a common framework. For system to system, so they are different. They are changing. So therefore, you need to ask one single question. What does the system want to do? What does it deliver to my end users? Will it deliver a list of students registered for the courses? Or will it generate some sort of the payment pending results sheet? You may think of some examples. So I have listed some down here. First one, add student records after validating user input. So user can insert any number of inputs. So this is my name, my address, my surname, my date of birth. And also these are my academic qualification, and these are the certificates. And also these are the payment mechanisms I'm planning to take on. So everything needs to be inserted by the end user or maybe a clerk in an institute. So when all these student details are added, it's important for us to check their correctness. We must make sure that all informations are valid. So the field where date of birth is entered, it's a valid date of birth. It should not be something coming after the current date. So search option is another functionality you do need to add to your system. Searching a student performance record or maybe student details, or highlighting that student or understanding the nature of the payment of that student. So based on student ID, you may make several searches in your system. So that may be one of the functionalities that you need to think of. You should be able to mail any report to the management, maybe the clerk, user here, the clerk of the system, clerk of the institute who is using the system for their performance monitoring services. And there, what does user have to do? User have to mail any reports or lot of reports to the management showing that this is the progress of our institute in terms of student registration and payments. So generations of additional reports will be really helpful for the management to make required decisions. And the number of students registered for each and every courses. So it is important for them to identify how many students have been registered for each and every course from the institutional perspective. So when you want to generate such reports, so it's important for you to include how many number of participants. So you have to add certain information, you have to store your details in a database and then retrieve the data, and maybe you need to pass a query and get the value and generate the report. So that's a kind of functional task you have to do. It's functional requirement. User can be divided into groups and groups can be given separate rights. So that is we call it role management. Each and every user level have to do certain things with the system. Not everything is available for every user, all level of users. Of course, we have an exception, administrator. Administrator has lots of rights to maintain entire system. So administrator can view everything, but not the end user or the management or a student. So they are having different aspects to be able to read. And we have to, as a system designer, we don't need to manage those requirements. What user wants to say, what a student want to say should be separated from what the management want to say. So maybe some common things they both want to see, but not the same. So therefore, as the designer or you, when you develop your system, so you first thing you have to do is you have to identify the requirements very clearly and identify who the stakeholders or the users of your system are. And now we look at the non-functional requirements. In non-functional requirements, you have to focus on the other aspects, which is not related to functional requirement aspects. So in simply, which are not related to functional aspects of software are called non-functional requirements. In implicit or explicit characteristics of software, which users make assumption of, will be falling into the non-functional requirements. They might think that, okay, what might happen if I enter my details or the student details into this system? Will they be secured safely? Is it good to store them, their personal details, their contact details and names and everything, very sensitive information? So how do you maintain the security? Will they be revealed by another student? So you have to maintain the security aspects of your software. So that is why the role management is pretty important. Or else you might think about the time constraint. So I do need to generate these sort of reports by end of every month. And also they are to be delivered on time. So there should be no other delays. And also you may need to impose certain development processes or standards. So I do have to maintain this standard and it must be fulfilled with my existing systems. So some sort of standards. We do often apply to the system as a whole. We don't look at individual modules when we come to the non-functional requirements. We consider the entire system as a whole. So my student management system, how secure it is, how easy to use, how reliable. So we do have different aspects to look at these non-functional requirements. Non-functional requirements can be related to the product requirements. So that means your software requirements. What is it? How efficient the software is. Should it be very slow? You might say that you are collecting data from the cloud. So therefore, it must have this sort of bandwidth and the internet connection should be super strong. If we it's not there, you will have very slow system. So you can't say like that. So efficiency requirements you need to set up as mentioned at the beginning. So it must be very efficient, otherwise nobody will use it. They will go back to the manual system. If your system is so too slow, they will not be ready to wait until it's up and run. Now, the next one, you may need to think about the dependability requirement, the second aspect, dependability requirement of the product, how dependent it is. So it is depending on many modules, or is it depending on another system? And the security, like I mentioned, how secured your data, how do you maintain them, how much security will be provided when you are maintaining roles, and who will be displaying the payment records. Can any user or student display or can generate reports on other students' payment? It's not possible. And the usability requirement, how usable? Is it easy to use or is it hard to use? So user satisfaction should be high in any software system. Performance requirement, how good the system is. The space requirement, do you need to have lots of space, computer memory space to run your system? So are you choosing any technology that needs lots of RAM or memory to run? So you must go for very reliable system. So it's easy to use, easy to install, and anybody can use it. Okay, user friendly. So those aspects you need to consider. And another aspect of functional requirement is coming from organizational requirements. So what does the development requirement, environmental requirement, and operational requirement, when you put the system into operation, how does it work? And development requirement, if you further want to add new modules later on, are we keeping the space for the improvements or is it all? And you might think of the external requirement, ethical requirement, how ethical. When we collect users' information, so are we going to ask them about whether they are married or how was their relationship status, or maybe are they coming from different ethnic groups, or are you happy with the ethnic group? So those are very sensitive. We should not want to analyze those ethical related factors in normal systems. So we should be very generic. So you should maintain such ethical requirements and legislative requirements, accounting and safety, security. So all these aspects now need to be decided or no need to be included for all the software systems. So you may decide some of them because only some will be related to some sort of software requirements. So for an example, if you develop some sort of application to the banking and finance sector, so it's important for you to have the accuracy. Accuracy must be considered, and also non-functional requirement, confidentiality, how confidential informations are. Performance-wise, you need to think of, and the security, usability, and those aspects are critical for a system or software system in banking and finance sector. So when we go to the education sector, of course, interoperability, whether is it possible for us to merge with other existing systems, or is it easy to expand? Performance, yes, it must be a critical factor there. Reliability, how reliable your system is. Can you trust it? Is it calculating the correct marks or generating correct GPAs of students? And the performance analysis, are they correct? Accuracy, you don't need to worry too much about it. And scalability, can I expand it further? Security, this data is very secure when we come to the student performance, so they are very secure, very sensitive data. How do you store them and how do you maintain them? Who else will be using them? How do you grant access to those data? And usability, entire system. Again, you need to remember that everything is focused on one single system, not individual model. Here, it's not about the student registration, it's not about the payment, but both. Okay, one single system. And energy sources, if you worry about the energy sources or management of the energy resources, or providing some systems for them to handle those resource requirements, that's another application you can think of. There you have to make sure that the resources are available and the performance of the systems and reliability, safety, and usability. So all these matters here when you come to the non-functional requirements, but it is only specific to energy and resources application domain. When we go to the government and military related application, so the domain is government and military, you know, it's security should be coming first. And also the standardizability, usability, verifiability, viability, it's a very high level domain. Privacy, performance, confidentiality, accuracy. So those are really matters. So you might say that everything is not related to all domain systems. So what is the domain that you have chosen, and inside that you do need to carefully analyze these non-functional requirements. Of course, some have not been listed down here. Major things have been listed down. You may encounter some other non-functional requirements based on the chart I have given earlier. And when we talked about the insurance domain, so insurance, we do have to think about the accuracy, yes, how confidential they are, insurance, medical insurance, health insurance, vehicle insurance. So do not know, normally have, they do not know, have these sort of very general information. They are very sensitive. It's about a specific person. Interoperability, security, usability. So those are the aspects that you need to think of. Now think about the medical and healthcare. There, confidentiality, integrity, performance, privacy, reliability, safety, security, traceability, usability. So all these matters a lot. Telecommunication services are also, in terms of security, it must be high. The maintainability, yes, of course. And there should be somebody to maintain in 24/7 hours in telecommunication and the transportation. So we can see airlines, transportations, or maybe bus routes. So we need to have some systems, and they should be maintained. Not like a system that is developed once in a while and then maintenance will be coming in once a year. Okay, so but transportation, so it's simple issues, so they needs to be solved very fast, and the system should be readily available for the transportations and the telecommunications. Availability is critical, and also the confidentiality is, it must be there because transportation is also an important domain and very different from the education. Real-time transportations, okay, so the verifiability, so who is transporting or who is checking in, who is checking out, so those things are critically important. So some sensitive applications, they need to be very secure, reliable, and also very usability, and the privacy. Okay, when it comes to the medical and healthcare, the privacy is pretty important. Safety, yes. And above all, you do need to trust the system, the reliability. So matters. And therefore, you do need to understand, based on your problem or the project that you are going to model, these non-functional requirements need to be identified. You should say that performance is good. And the safety-wise and the privacy-wise, I have maintained all my design aspects or requirements in such a way that information will be kept in secured manner. We know that when we are making passwords or storing passwords, we try to encrypt it. We never store the real password. We encrypt it and serve. So that's the security. So that's an non-functional requirement. So that's specific to the entire system, everything, not only the passwords, but all other details. Medical reports, yes, they must be secured. Only the doctors or responsible party should be able to be. If you go to the police department, so some FBI agencies, so they need to know about all these details, but they are very hidden. And they are using these sort of systems, and that one is very secure, and no the hacking, so others can come and take information, so chances are very low, very much secured. Usability, so you might say that when you jump into this general domain to sensitive domain, how your problem requirements are changing, especially the non-functional requirements and the functional requirements. So therefore here I do want you to focus on, as I mentioned before, complexity of the system should be judged. It's coming with the scope, and the domain that you are going to choose will be very important. Okay, so I here do expect that a prototype system, no need to develop a real system, go get real data, go after real people. So that may not be possible for some of your domain if you are going for the police department, and they are not going to give you all the robberies and the murder cases and all other information. Getting them will not be so easy. So therefore, do not need to have such a burden when you are implementing or designing this system. So be general. Okay, so you might get those information from your nearby place or the person or somebody or that the system that you have encountered or anything that you came across, okay, with your experience and so on. So think about all these aspects if you are going to develop a system for somebody. Okay, so from healthcare monitoring cases or insurance or education or your business. Okay, you are doing, maybe some of you are working in one of the interesting areas. Okay, so then there you may develop some aspect and some problems can be identified. And for those problems, you do need to come up with ideal solution. And in that solution, you need to identify the processes. Major processes need to be broken down into requirements. Functional requirements, non-functional requirements. So non-functional requirements are totally different from functional requirements. You understood now? And then these non-functional requirements, we are talking about for one single system, not for the whole individual components, like functional requirements. Here is an activity for you. So here we have given some requirements. Your job is to identify which one of them will be falling into the functional requirement category or which one of them will be falling into the non-functional requirement category. Let's read the first one. Send an email when a customer signs up. Is it related to security or the privacy or some other things? No, it's something related to the task. Okay, your system should be able to send an email when a customer signs up. So then that becomes a functional requirement. What about modified data in a database? Should be shown to all users accessing it within 2 seconds. So it must be coming at very fast. Okay, so that is somewhat related to your non-functional requirement. Within 2 seconds, everything should be coming about the speed or efficiency. So otherwise, there is no such limit. So it's not about sending a message like, please wait for 2 minutes, I will send you details. No. Okay, so things must be updated instantly, right? And then it must be ready to use in 1 second, milliseconds time. It's about the efficiency. So that is a non-functional requirement. System should automatically calculate the age of a user when date of birth is given. It's a functional requirement. It's something that your system must do. When you enter the date of birth, your age will automatically be calculated and the value will be stored in an appropriate database field. But it should be limited to 45 million. So that is not related to the functional requirement because it's about the cost of your system. That must be going with the non-functional requirements, how costly the solutions are. More than 2,000 users will use the system concurrently. That's reliability. Can I rely on my system? 10,000 users are accessing my system, will it go down? So that's about, again, non-functional requirements. So specific action, so we'll be falling into the major areas: accuracy, how accurate, how fast, so how efficient the system is, how secured. So those are the aspects you do need to come think and write under non-functional requirements. Now we will go and see another set of requirements which are not system-related requirements, but user-related requirements. We call it user requirements. What are user requirements? In natural language, you can specify what user wants. That will be considered as user requirement. There are statements in natural language or maybe some diagrams which describes what services the system is expected to provide to these users and the constraints under which it must operate. So what do I do in general? Those are very generic statements. What user wants from the system? The user requirements may vary from broad statements of the system features required to detail precise description of the system functionality. Let me give you an example. You might say that a system that manages patient records at the medical center and generate monthly management reports showing details of drugs and their availability is the system that is requested by a client. So that is what user wants, user requirement. What does user want is a system. Okay, what user want is a system. What does the system do? It should manage patient reports. Okay. Patients are coming to a medical center, in one medical center, so we need to manage all the user payments, user reports, and monthly management reports. Okay, what are the drugs they are having right now, their availability, and what about the prescriptions comes in, and how do we include their insert and delete or maybe remove or update operation. So that's what user wants. So not in that design level. So design will talk about, okay, I do need to insert this one into that table. So that is not the aspect we need to look at. We need to look at from the end user's perspective. So that's totally about a system. So what user wants system? I want the system to get this done. Right. So now when we go and talk about what sort of things, let's look at another example. Let's look at the previous example where mental health care patient information system. So where there's a clinic, medical clinic, and their patients' informations will be recorded. So mental health care, so specific set of patients, not general. Physicians will be working, so they are specialized in this mental health. So now if we want to develop a system for such medical center, what sort of requirements do we need to focus on? Then we have user requirements and system requirements. So two broad aspects, they are not overlapping. But yes, they have some relationships. User requirement specification should be mentioned in terms of natural language. So for an example, you might call your system as MentCare system. The system shall generate monthly management reports. Monthly management reports showing the cost of drugs prescribed by each clinic during that month. So what about the cost of the drugs? So that's a simple requirement which is requested by the end user. You need to generate monthly management reports which shows the cost of drugs. When we come to system requirement specification, we do need to go into the system aspect, the functional aspects of the system. So there you might write on the last working day of each month, a summary of the drugs prescribed, their cost and the prescribing clinic shall be generated. So you are going to more details. So get more details about the report. So in the previous case, user requirement. So user just mentioned that I want to generate monthly report and I do need this sort of information there. But now when we come to the system requirement specification and the functional requirement specifically, so you do have to say, how do we generate those information in these reports? So there you have to say on the last day of each month, a summary of the drugs. So we know what drugs. So we do need to know the drugs details. So we can map as a designer, then you map. Okay, you go to the table and get these sort of information about the drug. So drug prescribed will be taken in. And the cost, cost of the drugs. Prescribing clinic shall be generated. So that's the one thing you have to do. The other thing might be the system shall generate the report of printing after 1730 on the last working day of the month. So there's a specific time. This time you have to do this. So the action to be triggered by that time, 7:30. You have to write a specific functionality which triggered at 7:30 p.m. on every day of each month, on last working day of each month. Last working day of each month. So there's an action to be triggered. So it must be automatically generated. So therefore, you have to have a functional aspect, functional requirement there. Third one, a report shall be created for each clinic and shall list the individual drug names, total number of prescriptions, the number of doses prescribed, and the total cost of the prescribed drugs. So that is another requirement. You need to generate these reports based on each clinic. So group by operation might be applicable here. You might find another way to generate the same report, but you need to generate reports based on each clinic, not all in one. So maybe the next one, if drugs are available in different dose or units, so maybe some drugs are available in 20 milligrams or 10 milligrams or 500 milligrams, the separate report shall be created on each dose unit. So that is more specific. Okay, so you might say that how differ your user requirements and system requirements. Some are functional. And here access to drug cost report shall be restricted to authorized users as listed on a management access control list. So you have to manage roles and generate reports, and that action should be granted, okay, based on, okay, given rules. So therefore, all management is required. That is also one aspect of security, okay, maintaining all this information and in secured mode. So now we have learned a lot about these functional and non-functional requirements. So I'm sure that you will be able to understand what functional requirements are in your project and what non-functional requirements are. So in summary, we learned about the system requirements and we identified the major categories of system requirements as non-functional and non-functional requirements. So functional requirements and non-functional requirements are two different aspects, two different components. So don't mix them up in your design. And you do need to understand what user requirements are. You have to prepare these requirements. I just mentioned one or two here. But when you write those requirements in your project, you do need to focus on everything. A complete picture must be given, not just a part. And identify the functional and non-functional requirement associated to your own programmable problem is expected. So that's the task you have to do. Thank you very much for being with me. I'll meet you at the next lesson.